There is a hurdle there that institutions are going to need to find ways to navigate. One of the, because you mentioned startups, and I think startups are a huge element of this, right? We have brilliant entrepreneurial people either in or around the education space that could fundamentally change the game. The challenge is that institutions are generally so risk averse that they're not willing and open to the idea of early partnership with startups necessarily, because the first question they ask is, can you prove to us that you can manage an institution of our size? And that answer is always going to be no until you manage an institution of that size.
Good afternoon, good morning, and good evening, depending on where you are in the world. My name is Jabir McKnight, and I'm your host of the Spark Podcast. And I have an amazing guest here today, Dr. TJ Logan, Executive Director at Brailsford and Dunlavey and their higher education practice, and former Associate Vice President at The Ohio State University, as well as Temple University. Also, he is the one that had put the proverbial mic in front of me and gave me an opportunity to speak on my first podcast. So I'm happy that you're able to join us and carve out the time. How are you feeling today?
Thanks for having me. And you're right. I remember way back you joined me on my podcast several years ago. I also appreciate that you said the for Ohio State University. I'm not contractually obligated to do that anymore, but I appreciate it when somebody else throws it in there.
Absolutely. I mean, school pride is everything, and I know those small things matter. It's a part of the brand identity, and there's a reason that it's there. And I don't want to anger any Ohio State University
And there are
fans.
lots of them.
Yeah, this is going to be an absolutely amazing conversation. So, we're going to talk about the state of higher education. We're going to talk about what the rest of this decade looks like and what 2030 looks like, and what we need to do, whether you are a higher education professional, you're a student, or a parent, to put yourself in the best position to succeed in this current landscape and the landscape to come. Before we go there, I would love to really start with your background. Of course, we touched on it, but can we start? What was your first job in higher education? Why did you want to go into higher education? And how has that mission changed?
Well, the first thing I'll say is I don't know that I early on in my career would have said I wanted to go into higher education. I think like many folks who end up working as a practitioner in the field, it kind of happens by accident. And you look back and you say, wow, what a great accident, right? I ended up in the right spot doing the right kinds of things. And I probably wouldn't have called myself a higher ed professional until I was a solid almost 10 years into the industry doing work. And I'd already worked at two institutions. My first role was at Kent State University, where I got my undergraduate degree. I got my MBA there. And while getting my MBA, I worked my way up through the housing operation. I was the associate director, senior associate director of housing there when I finished up there. And then I went on to the University of Florida, where I was the director of housing there. And that was after that is when I ended up as the associate vice president for student life at Temple University, and then had a similar role with oversight of all the auxiliaries at the Ohio State University. And so I've been at this about 25 years now. And over the course of that time, like I said, I don't think I would have said, hey, I have this ambition to be in higher ed. It was just a happy accident for me where the right opportunities were there. I had the right mentors around me and made the most of it.
How did those mentors help, I guess, mold
Mm,
your path, or how did they help contextualize the strengths that you were building and give you a help you and guide
yeah.
your vision to, all that you could accomplish? And clearly they were right.
Well, I appreciate that. I've been so fortunate to bump into a handful of folks in my life who this was the key differentiator. They believed in me more than I did myself at times. So I never had a shortage of confidence. I always believed I had the stuff to do the thing. But every once in a while, you run into somebody that's willing to put their name next to yours and take that risk. I will never forget when I was at the University of Florida, the associate vice president that I worked for there called me into his office, and he had a piece of paper in front of him, and he said, I'm writing a book series with the Association of College and University Housing Officers. Here's the list of book chapters. And he slid it across the table and said, which one are you going to write?
Mm.
It wasn't a question of would you like to write a chapter. It was already assumed you're going to do this, and I'd like to know which one you're going to tackle. And I quickly kind of read through it, and my mind was going 100 miles an hour. I'd never written a book chapter. I'd never been asked to contribute to something like that. And so I picked out a chapter. I actually ended up helping and co-authoring 2 chapters in that series by the end of the day. But what I found out afterwards was he took a little bit of heat from his colleagues when he released the author list because I was a little bit of an unknown name at the time. And he said, he's got it. Don't worry. And I remember coming back to him later and saying, hey, I really appreciate you believing in me. And he said, oh, don't thank me. I'm really selfish. I only support people that I know are going to succeed because it makes me look good. And I love that framework of, finding those people that are probably punching above their weight a little bit, that if you can give them a pathway, you can give them an avenue, it's mutually beneficial. Everybody's going to win when you lift up those people that have a talent or have an ability that maybe the world can't see yet. And if you give them a little bit of some leeway and a pathway, everybody wins in that situation.
Wow. How old were you at the time when
Oh,
you
I was
authored
pretty
that?
young. I was not quite 30, I believe. So I was in my late 20s. I was working on my doctoral degree. Um, I had my goals were a little bit misaligned. My goals were all about, what was I going to do, what title I was going to have, how much I was going to earn by a certain age, and he reframed all of that for me. He was all about, why don't you focus on being the best thing that you are right now? Why don't you focus on expertise and carving out your expertise, and the rest will come. And that was a turning point in my life where I looked around and said, I need to stop making this work about me and start making it about being the best at the work. And the minute I did that, the world really did open up for me. So that's where I was.
Wow. So impact
Yeah.
over titles. The
Yeah.
titles will come with the impact.
If you take first things first, you take care of the stuff right in front of you. Whenever I have staff or young professionals that are like, I aspire to this, 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 and I love that. But my first piece of advice is be the best at your job. And if you're the best at your job, I promise you that next opportunity is going to be in front of you. It's all going to take care of itself. And that's mainly because that's been my experience. Is the minute I stopped looking ahead and started just being exceptional at what I was, the world really does open up.
So thinking about that, right? Because I feel
Yeah.
like that is a huge topic right now, right? In this, world that is increasingly social, increasingly shrinking, where speed is prioritized and
Hmm.
brand is prioritized, looking like you're doing the thing, in the words of Gary V, right? Like day trading attention
Yep. Yep.
and how important that is. I'm wondering, what do you feel is the sweet spot for a young professional or even a professional that's looking to pivot between doing the best work and also telling your story? Like, how do you
Yeah.
know you're
Yeah.
doing great?
Yeah, right. It is a balance, right? I remember there was a moment in my career just before that sort of book chapter moment where I felt like I didn't have a whole lot to offer the profession necessarily. I was engaged in the profession. I was going to conference space. I was listening, and that same AVP said, well, one, you have way more expertise than you think you do. And if you can put yourself in front of the world on one topic, and for me, that topic was actually social media and higher education at the time. He said, put yourself in front of the world on one topic, become the expert in that thing. The rest is going to come. The other stuff will build out. I focused on that one thing. I started writing about it. I started talking about it, presenting about it. Within a year, I had done 2 international keynotes, one in Scotland, one in Australia for these conferences on the topic of social media and higher ed. I ended up writing my dissertation on that, the implications for social media utilization for enrollment managers in higher education, and how that was all going to work. And the rest of the world then came, right? The other things that I had expertise in, people started to sort of ping me for, see me as a voice of innovation and entrepreneurship in higher education. And so that would be my thing is one, get some focus on a thing you can be an expert in. I think there's something really special about that. The other thing I would say about that balancing act is I say this even to my kids now. In the world that we live in, knowledge is free. It is like having the knowledge is not the hard part. It's the wisdom that's really expensive. So we can all get a hold of the knowledge. We can Google anything we want to Google. We can use AI to get whatever we want. How we apply it in our world is where wisdom comes in. And wisdom, unfortunately, can only come with experience. That's not something I wanted to know as a young professional, but it's something that was very, very true. And so I would remind folks to look around and say, where am I building up and depositing into my wisdom piggy bank as much as I am sort of going out there and getting knowledge, and pairing those two to be as successful as I can be.
Wow. So if I could boil that down, what I heard was start with where you are, grow where you're planted, identify your expertise, which typically, to your point, right? Like experience, you're building experience. You may just not know where you're building that experience. You have to identify your environment, what you're doing natural. You can have an eye for culture, you can have an eye for trends, to things that you're automatically glued to. You're going to have some level of expertise and wisdom in, and then do the work, because you can't, if you're not doing the work, it doesn't really matter.
And I'll add one last piece onto that, and it's
Mm-hmm.
only because it's so fresh on my mind. We talk about this all the time at Brailsford and Dunlavey, where I have the privilege of doing my work now. Humility is the great expander of capacity, and it's got to
Mm.
come in that order, right? The smartest people in the world have enough humility to know what they don't know, and surround themselves with people that can fill in those gaps, right? Or ask the question to make themselves better, right? And so, yes, gain that expertise. Yes, don't undervalue yourself. Yes, put yourself out in the world, but also pair that with the humility to expand your capacity. And if you do those, and that's a balancing act. Those two things got to come together. If you could do both those things together, the world is yours.
Wow. Wow. So you started in education in 2000. It's
Yeah.
currently 2025, so it's 25 years. I was just looking at a graph from the Bureau of Labor Statistics,
Hmm.
and higher education, college tuitions and fees are almost up 200%. The only thing that's higher in regards to inflation is hospital services.
Yep. Yep.
So when you came into education in 2000, compared to the work that you're doing now, would you say, when we're thinking about all of the auxiliary services that are being put into education, student support services, whether that's, events or housing or mental health support, do you think that education, like the core of what it means to go to college, has that increased in regards to like productivity by 200%?
Wow. That first, are you blaming me for the 200% since I started?
Absolutely
No, I'm
not.
kidding you.
No, absolutely not.
Yeah, I'm kidding you. Yeah. So, wow. I think that higher education has gotten more complicated and more holistic over that period of time for certain. There's a lot of different theories as to why the cost has gone up, right? Like people look at overhead and administration, and they look at, the mental health resources, and they look at all the things that have been added over the course of time. Also, this paradigm of what higher education is has changed over the course of that time, right? More than 25 years ago now, when I started college, I was in that first generation of humans in America who were sort of sold the American dream that you had to go to college in order to achieve the next thing. It was just this expectation that that was your next step, whether you could afford it or not. And so I was put in one of those early positions that I was one of the first generations to take on a lot of student loan debt and then have to spend the next 20 years trying to figure out how to pay that off. Now, was the value proposition there for me? Absolutely. Long term, it absolutely was. But I understand looking at higher education and asking yourself those same questions about value proposition today and maybe even back then. So the core of your question is, has there been a 200% increase in the value of education? I don't know. I think higher education is potentially fundamentally different today than it was 25 years ago. Expectations of what the student experience is, expectations by both students and families and parents and those that support them, it's a different world. When I worked on campus, I remember thinking about the engagement and involvement and expectations of parents today versus where it was 25, 30 years ago. It's a very different animal. And that comes with some level of cost to it as well. All of that said, I certainly think we're at a little bit of a reckoning, right? We are at this point. The pandemic hurried some things up. You might remember from when I was podcasting all the time, I would say the pandemic created zero problems. It just accelerated the ones we already had. And so that acceleration has put us at that reckoning point. I think we're there. We're now in parallel with the enrollment cliff. Some things have to change. And I think that's what's on the horizon is we've had change deferred, and now it's time to pay the Pied Piper and move forward as an industry.
Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting, like you said, right? The pandemic has accelerated so much when we're talking about even access to online courses, doing those co-op programs when
Hmm.
you're in high school, but you're
Hmm.
also going to community college. A lot of people
Hmm.
are leaning into community college a little bit more. Workforce development is becoming increasingly important even while in the university space. I've seen, personally, there's still universities that are, after coming out of the pandemic, just still fighting against the trends and what was accelerated during the pandemic and getting back
No question.
to what was normal.
Right. Yeah, you might remember if you get in your time machine, go back to 2019, there were a lot of highly respected voices in higher education that were predicting a great number of mergers and closures, particularly within small institutions at that time. The pandemic and the CARES money deferred a bunch of that, right? Like it kind of dropped off for a period of time because everybody all of a sudden had a pathway to stay open for a chunk of time that they didn't anticipate being open. And so in some ways, the pandemic slowed that inevitable thing for some institutions. Then we saw that pick back up. Right. And so in the last 2 years now, the numbers of closures, mergers, things happening in that area of the landscape, those have actually increased over the past couple of years again. And I tend to believe that's because those were deferred during the pandemic. Those were sort of held tight during that period of time. Now it feels like a few different things are going on. If you would go back again to 2020 and some of the data that came out, everybody said, community colleges are going to do exceptionally well. And then some other traditional types of institutions may not, particularly with the enrollment cliff. A lot of that actually didn't happen. A lot of what we have seen is what I'll call a flight to certainty. So the Ohio States of the world, the large public land grants, if you watch the news, you would think there are like 15 universities in this country because they're the only ones that get named, right? And especially from your experience, that's not true. There's all different shapes and sizes of universities. And in fact, the biggest part of the pie is not those 15 universities. But in this world, those 15 universities, there's been a flight to certainty. They are not struggling with enrollment. The ones that we all talk about all the time, the ones that are on the news, those folks aren't struggling with enrollment. It's everybody in the middle that is struggling with enrollment. And so you look at your mid majors and some of those folks that are in tight regions where they're competing with each other for the same students. Those are the folks that are going to have to think about, what does differentiation look like for me in the coming years in order to thrive in this, not survive, but thrive in this landscape.
Absolutely. Professor Scott Galloway from
Hmm.
NYU's Business School, Stern Business School. I love this saying that higher education has become a luxury good
Mm,
due to its exclusivity and rising costs, right? But it's almost a necessity and the number one indicator of social or economic mobility. That's true for me.
yep. Yep.
I think it's true for people that have come before me, and it'll be true for at least the near future for those that come after. But I mean, we're talking about education, even in higher education, I mean, high school and middle school, and there are a lot of impacts there. Many students need more support at the higher
Yeah.
education level than they would have needed before, and it's only going to get worse. And there's no certainty in this job market. I mean, we're seeing it's not just the private sector now. Federal jobs are going to be hard to
Right.
come by.
Right.
We're going to see a trickle down effect in states as well. So it's already hard for a young person to get experience, whether it's an internship. Most prestigious internships are harder to come by and harder to get into than prestigious universities.
Hmm. Right.
And then you have pipelines from those prestigious universities or bigger institutions that you named into a lot of these internship programs. You have people that are just trying to survive out in the world that are working,
Hmm.
doubles and jobs in retail where young people typically would have those jobs. We're it's a constraint there, right? And I think our landscape from 2025 to 2030 with AI and with the effects of the pandemic are incredibly troubling. I don't have any stats in front of me, but that is what I know.
Yeah. So I think the next question then, Jabir, is like, what do we do about it? Right. And That's why I feel so lucky today, because I've transitioned from being campus based to being somebody who gets to work with a lot of campuses and a lot of contexts and gets to ask big questions like that and try to solve big questions like that on behalf of the campuses that I get to work with. And I think one of the biggest overarching themes that I've come to is this, that in order to achieve different outcomes, we've got to change the systems that we are working under, right? A lot of times I'll work with a campus and they'll say, what we're doing isn't working. And I'll say, no, 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 what you're doing is working. It's just not achieving the outcome. It's achieving the outcome it was designed to achieve.
Yes.
Now you want a different outcome. So we're going to have to undo the systems to ensure they're aligned with the outcome that you would like to achieve. As an example, if you're a commuter campus that has built your entire structure around being a commuter campus, and then within 10 years you want to be a residential campus, you're going to have to disrupt the entire structure and system that was built, because the outcomes you're trying to achieve relative to student engagement and student success are different. They're just fundamentally different. And having now been on probably literally hundreds of college campuses, I can tell you, you know it when you feel it, and when you get onto a campus that is set up to achieve a certain outcome versus a different kind of outcome, right? And so I think we have to disrupt some of those systems to get there, because the systems are set up to achieve the outcomes that they're achieving. You want to change the outcomes, you got to move the system. Einstein would say insanity is doing the same thing over and over, expecting a different result. That's what higher ed's doing right now, right? They're doing the same thing over and over. They're like, yeah, but we want that result over there. The other thing I'll say about that, and I think this idea needs to permeate the landscape of higher education, we need to get away from this mentality of thinking we need to do more with less. Everybody's complaining about more with less, more with less. We need to do the right amount with the right amount. And the right amount is, what's the outcome that is most important for us to achieve? And how do we allocate the right amount of resource to do that thing? And as hard as it is, where we're allocating resource that is not aligned with the thing we're trying to achieve, we just have to stop allocating that resource. And it's going to take some hard systematic looks at the way we do things to be able to make those changes.
Wow. So going on hundreds of college campuses,
Yeah.
fundamentally, do you think when we're talking about, large research universities or public, large state universities versus, smaller universities, is there a talent gap in regards to the
No.
administration? Is there,
In the administration, maybe.
yeah,
I
or
think,
faculty and
yeah.
administration?
In terms of if you look at a community college all the way up through your large public land grant institution, I think there's certainly a feeling that there's what I would call a level of professionalization that happens in some of those spaces. So if you take a large land grant institution, faculty, staff, administration, people tend to flock to those kinds of locations or aspire to those kinds of locations because they're the 15 institutions we hear about on the news, right? So I'm an example of that, right? I'm a kid who grew up in Ohio and loved the idea of working at the public land grant institution of my home state. And so the name recognition of The Ohio State University was an opportunity for me to work in a space. And so regardless of all the professional experiences I had had at my institutions and in the profession up to that point, I wanted to apply that knowledge at a place like Ohio State because it felt like a place I could thrive. You don't necessarily have that as you look sort of down that chain of different kinds of institutions. Now, that said, there are plenty of high achieving, talented, amazing professionals all across the sphere. I've walked onto community colleges and seen, I used that term earlier, people punching above their weight. I see people that could run any operation in the country working on a commuter or a community college campus, or working at a small private institution in an urban center, or there's plenty of talent out there. So I don't want to say that you can just walk onto a campus and make an assumption like that, but there are probably some trends that you would see just based on the virtue of them being destination institutions, not just for students, but also for faculty, staff, administration who want to work in those kinds of environments. Sometimes those are the resource-rich environments, right? It's fun to work in environments where you have a little bit more resource, right?
Mhm.
By the same token, you can go onto one of those campuses and find somebody who is not the most professionalized of staff members because they've worked at that institution and only that institution for 30 some years and don't have context outside of that relative to how to approach the work. So it is all over the board.
Wow. So thinking about technological implementation, I see this at a lot of universities. They call it, high engagement, low touch, right? Where you're
Mm,
dropping in these tools in student success just to elevate the student experience, and it's a new tech tool. And you see universities really just going through these new tools every
Oh
two
yeah.
to 3 years, whether it's handshake or anything else, and you just kind of drop it into the environment, and you expect a staff that may be under resourced, whether it's most career development offices or first gen experience
Hmm.
support, to help students work through these new technologies and put a lot of resources into them without the proper, some universities, organizational support to actually teach faculty or staff on
Hmm.
how to use these
Right.
resources. And these are the resources that are making the university experience more expensive for
Mhm.
students, right? Because
Right.
the cost always goes to the consumer. How have you seen that? And does that speak a little bit to the allocation of resources that you were mentioning?
Yeah, yeah, what you're pointing out is I see that all the time, right? We will see a campus take on a software solution as an example, and they're going to use that software solution for a variety of different things. You mentioned handshakes, so that's about the career center opportunity, right? Or it could be in the sphere of mental health. It could be in the sphere of academic advising and tutoring. It could be there's a platform for everything in student success, especially in this post-pandemic world. What happens often is that institutions have two things that they're doing at once. One is that they pilot, right? Everybody likes to pilot a thing. The downside of a pilot is that you don't stop doing the other thing, right? Because usually the other thing you've invested resources, probably mostly in staff. That is the bulk of what institutions spend money on is on people. And so you've got these people that are still doing the thing, and then you're going to run the pilot. Well, now you've doubled your cost, right, relative to that thing. And you find yourself in a position because you've doubled your costs. If this doesn't perform so overwhelmingly better than this, you're going to have a really hard time cutting ties with this, which is going to make it hard to scale the pilot to anything that's going to be effective. So I see that actually all the time where people essentially do two things at once. There's more resource constraint when you do that, and eventually you just don't get over the hump with the technology solution to be able to scale it to a place where you can actually do it at a lower cost relative to student engagement. So I see that happening an awful lot. The other thing I think I see quite a bit that I think is really, really important is institutions defining what are going to be those lead and lag indicators of success when they implement a thing, right? We as humans tend to love shiny things, right? You see a technology solution, the thing is shiny, it's something you can put in your annual report, you can brag about it, but what is the lead indicator that tells you that it's going to work? And what are the lag indicators that tells you that it worked? Right? We're pretty good at the lag indicator stuff. We're not really good at the lead indicator stuff. And so that's a missing chunk for me too, is what are we doing in the implementation of these platforms that we are identifying what are going to be those KPIs or success metrics that we're going to have as a lead and a lag to know that the thing is working the way that we intend for it to work, and that we're agile enough to be able to shift and move to make sure that it is working in the way that we intend. It's getting the outcome that we want to get, which arguably is almost always student success measured by persistence, retention, GPA, all those different types of things.
Wow. Wow. So thinking about this environment that's shifting, I'm still thinking about there are some startups out there like Campus and Assemble that are creating platforms for education outside of the classroom or collaboration with universities that don't have the infrastructure for online learning in an environment where you need it more than ever. How do you see the role of, I would say, private public partnerships in sustaining some of the universities that don't necessarily have the infrastructure at this current
Yeah.
moment to compete?
Yeah, we actually do a ton of P3 public-private partnership advisory. A lot of times it's in physical infrastructure, but there is a hurdle there that institutions are going to need to find ways to navigate. One of the, because you mentioned startups, and I think startups are a huge element of this, right? We have brilliant entrepreneurial people either in or around the education space that could fundamentally change the game. The challenge is that institutions are generally so risk averse that they're not willing and open to the idea of early partnership with startups necessarily, because the first question they ask is, can you prove to us that you can manage an institution of our size? And that answer is always going to be no until you manage an institution of that size. So it's a real chicken and egg issue for a startup. And you have to find, I did this a lot throughout the course of my career. I partnered with probably a half dozen startups over 25 years. And early stage folks, and partnered with them in really meaningful ways in a trade-off situation where we'd say, look, we need a low cost relationship. In exchange for that, I'm going to help you really continue to develop the product in a way that's going to work best at institutions. I'm going to stand on a stage with you and co-present and talk about the benefits as we reach those together collaboratively. And you're going to reach new heights because we're going to be the number one case study for you. But you got to have more people that are willing to do that, more people that are willing to step out there and say, look, I see a little bit of potential and I'm willing to put the work in with you in a partnership to help you develop the thing that's actually going to serve the industry in the right way. The easy way is to hide behind procurement processes and say, you're just not a contender for us because you don't have enough history or you're too much liability for us. The hard way is finding really creative ways to navigate those processes, to partner with somebody in a meaningful way. And like I look at, it's called Room Sync now, but it was called Room Bug way back in the day when I partnered with them. Now they ended up partnering with RMS, who just got bought by StarRes, to do online roommate matching through Facebook. 20 years ago, I was partnering with them, and people were looking at me like, you can't partner with these guys that are building something out of their dorm room. And we're like, yeah, we can, because we think that it's an interesting opportunity to add a layer of technology that cuts down on our resource allocation and serves students better. Did the same thing with NAC, which was they were marketing themselves as the Uber for tutoring back in the day.
Mm-hmm.
And now they're on campuses all over the country, and they're doing these really high power engagements where they're not just making students more successful, they're actually connecting students to career opportunities as they move through too. So, you got to find more people that are willing to sort of spot the opportunity, get creative, and engage in a partnership that's going to be mutually beneficial to develop a product collaboratively.
So, flipping the audience for
Hmm.
this, right? We talked about education. Now, let's talk
Yep.
about the young professionals like myself, young
Hmm.
entrepreneurs that are building out, products and
Hmm.
trying to break into the higher education space. I know you referenced NAC and a few other platforms. What did they do well to sell their product outside of having a support system and someone that saw the value in what they're doing? What did they do well before that?
They paired humility with expertise. They did that thing we talked, and they really did. NAC is a great example. Their founder, Samir, he is a guy I have watched sit in board of trustee level or cabinet level conversations and really fit well in the room, but also have the humility to say, I don't fully understand this context. And so I need to make sure that I'm asking the right questions or partnering in the right ways. And so it's that balance of confidence and expertise and humility to find the avenues to partner and to bridge. You'll know when you come across somebody that's trying to sell you a thing versus somebody who's trying to achieve a solution. Those are different things, right? Somebody trying to sell me a thing, and I run across hundreds of people like that. You can walk across any expo floor at any higher ed conference and run across hundreds of people that want to sell you a thing. You know it though when you run into somebody that really wants to provide a solution to the industry, believes in the thing that they're doing, and is humble enough to engage you in conversations to make that thing a better thing. So I think that's the answer is approaching the space with some humility, with some willing to partner and move the thing forward in a way that is a little more organic than might otherwise happen.
Wow. And so, like you said, you that selling versus understanding your why and really leaning into providing a solution. Like, what are the intricacies of how do you know it's a difference? You're on the other side of that. You're talking to
I am.
someone at
Yeah.
their expo table. How do you know as
Yeah.
a higher education professional that this person is really looking to solve this issue
Yeah.
for good while also making money, obviously?
Yeah, I mean, there's certainly, authenticity is something that I think most people can sniff out. Most people can kind of feel. I think there are some little signs of that, right? If I'm talking with somebody and they're saying like, here's what I believe we're going to do, and then ask me a question versus telling me that I need the thing. It's just nuance, but it's very, very different. When somebody says, we've built this thing because we believe it solves for X. I would love to hear your opinion on that. That's different than saying, and you need it, right? It's engaging in an actual conversation with an openness to hear how somebody might disagree with you, or somebody might say, well, yes, but you have to consider this thing, and this thing. And that's when you get those jewels of wisdom that are going to make the product better. And I've watched companies transcend from being very early stage folks who are in that humble question asking phase to developing into what I would call industry pillars, who now they are the expert, and they are the people that folks come to and say, hey, you're the trusted expert now. But you got to get to that place. You don't start at that place. It's just like knowledge and wisdom, right? Wisdom comes with that time and experience. So does getting to that space where you become the trusted industry partner versus the person who's trying to become.
Wow. I think that's extremely important, definitely for, our younger listeners and young professionals. 'Cause it is important. And I've heard it in so much work, especially some work that we've done at Wyden and Kennedy with their Ad Magic program. There's so many young professionals that, they come out the gate, no, I want to be a creative director. No, I am a creative director.
Right,
It's
right.
like, what is that? You can be a creative
You can
director,
be.
but if you want to be the creative director that I know you want to be, there's a level of taste making that you have, which means you have to put points on the board. We talk about that all the time. How can someone trust you with their vision, especially in work that has so much ambiguity,
Right.
to create the right thing if you haven't put points on the board?
And you don't have to fake it. People will see if you're somebody who's intellectually honest, and you're somebody who, you are intellectually curious. You ask good questions. When you are asked to solve for something, you do the research you need to do. You really push the envelope. People will see that. And so you don't have to fake it and say, I've got all these experience, or I am these things, but you can say, I think this way. I problem solve this way. I believe in these things. Those are the things that will make you a great partner, that will make you a great whatever it is you aspire to be, is thinking in a way that is elevated, that is engaging in a way that is intellectually curious and honest. Oh, you don't have to fake that. And I see too many people just really trying to fake it instead of leaning into what is so special about them in terms of being the kind of person that you want to partner with.
I love that. And I should have asked this question earlier, but it's top of mind for me. I remember, again, sitting at home and writing this article in 2020 with no expectation.
Yeah.
Honestly, I just truly believed in what I was writing. And, I heard about this cool platform called Medium where you could just kind of post your thoughts for free. And I put it up there and you end up reaching out. I
Yeah.
don't know how you even found the article. And I was shocked, even when we were talking on the phone. He's like, I would love for you to come on the podcast to talk about this. And for me, that was a very important moment in my development, because this was something that I was passionate about. It was something I've been working on since undergrad and really building up my expertise. And I just shared it out into the ether. And you reached out, someone that, for me, it was very validating, for someone that has, a high level professional expertise and education to value, something that I put out into the world. How did you come across that, and what were your thought process?
I do remember it. And I got to tell you, I don't know how I came across it other than I was maniacally searching for certain perspectives. But I do remember finding it. And I do remember reading this article and thinking, who is this guy who's putting out this, again, it's intellectually honest and curious. And it's saying some of the quiet stuff out loud. And it's so well stated and well articulated. Who is this guy? And it felt like you were entering the space to have a real conversation, not to state your opinion as fact. And that's what lit me up was, I'm thinking of these same kinds of ideas, and there's somebody else out in the world who's willing to put that out onto the internet at least. So I got to talk with this guy. And that's when I reached out to you. And I think you came on the show, my podcast, a couple times, including one with a faculty member, to talk about tenure, right? And like, does tenure make sense in a contemporary higher education world? Since the minute I met you, you demonstrated both competence and humility, intellectual honesty and intellectual curiosity. And the combination of those four things are what make us all better all the time. And so that's the story of how I came across you. And that came through in your writing. That came through immediately as I read that. I was like, oh, this is a guy I just want to talk to. And so I'm fortunate to have stumbled across you and continued to stay engaged, because you have proven that over and over and over again to me over the many years.
You know, I appreciate that. And again, I appreciate your support again and putting that out into the world and also putting me in front of other higher education professionals to like share my opinion on what I've observed. You know, I went to a small university, Lincoln University of Pennsylvania, but I was fortunate enough through mentorship and other programs to, travel abroad and to also go to conferences. And one of the things that I quickly realized, and I still realize it today, is that resource difference at different universities and how that allows for innovation, not just for the university, but for the students that go to the university. In my opinion, I've received a lot of pushback in the university setting for things that I feel if I went to a Penn or a university that had like an incubator system, that I would have been propped up and supported, right?
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
it's not a who are you to solve this problem? It's wow, that's a really interesting perspective that you have. I wonder if we supported that a little bit more, we could grow on
Right.
that.
Right. Well, you thank me. There's a little secret there. I am very selfish. I only support people that I know are going to do well because I want to put my name next to them. So you're one of those people for sure. That's a philosophy I did inherit from that person that I got to work with. Yeah, context matters, right? And I was just talking with one of the founders of our firm the other day about resources at institutions, and then the other side of that, which is resources of individuals and the correlation between highly resourced individuals and opportunities and not so highly resourced individuals and lack of opportunity and what our opportunities and responsibilities are relative to trying to close those gaps and trying to find a better path and a better way. And so I think your observation is keen. I think it is spot on as per usual, right? Like you've had an ability since I met you and probably long before that to kind of sit back and see the world a little bit and see the bigger picture beyond just the way you're engaging in it. And that shows up every time you make an observation like that.
I appreciate it. So let's talk about AI,
Hmm.
right? Blockchain, all these innovative technologies. Last time we talked on the pod, at least, we were talking about this fifth industrial revolution, which is extremely important. I was working in policy at the time on the Hill, and I knew even then, 2020, 2021, I'm like, man, the world is changing so fast. Do I want to be stuck in like the government affairs bubble, which I think is extremely important, right? To keeping things moving forward. Or do I want to continue, to your point earlier, to put myself in a position to build my expertise and do interesting work in and around where the world is going? And I mean, little did I know, I didn't even think things would move this fast. I mean, Chat GPT wasn't even a thing when we
That's
had a
right.
conversation.
That's right.
And then we're looking at, these large, LLMs, large language models, and how that's shifting not just how universities have to engage with the environment where learning was already extremely competitive, right? Like
Hmm.
you already can go to YouTube, you can go to TikTok,
Knowledge
you
is
can go to
free.
any social media platform and learn anything. And now you have a platform where, and other platforms where you can just throw information in there and
Yep.
learn,
Yep.
right? So that's going to make education increasingly more difficult to at least quantify, but justify the ROI with this increase in debt. But I have to say the but. I think we're in dangerous times, just from my perspective and seeing people that we have a lot of information, but to your point, there's not a lot of wisdom, critical thinking, and the ability to really dig into the information and stay narrow and focused. What are you trying to get from this information? Where does ChatGPT even get its information? How do you validate the sources?
What
At the
do I do
bottom,
with
it says
this?
it could be
Right.
incorrect.
Right. Right.
So, what is the sweet spot for individuals and universities and I
Well,
guess mitigating
yeah,
this?
when you talk about that, it gives me a couple of thoughts. One is that, yes, I think that the universities that are embracing the realities of AI and integrating them in smart ways are the ones that are essentially going to win, right? I've always been a meet them where they are kind of person. And I think embracing the realities of technology and where it's going and how to utilize them and apply them in the real world for success is important. And in fact, it's an important life skill, right? Like, my kids, as an example, in high school, take classes on how to identify legitimate news source and how to then validate and understand whether that is any good or not good, or how to fact check, or how to even find alternative opinions. That wasn't a class when I was in high school, right? And I think the application of that skill set is important in a contemporary world. I think the same thing about utilization of AI. And so I think institutions that embrace some of those things are going to be important. The other half of that, as you talk, I think about, well, what is then the value proposition of higher education in a world where knowledge is free? I think about it on two fronts. One is that first piece, which is that if you embrace application of AI in a really smart way, then you continue to remain relevant. The other is a lot of the data that came out of the pandemic. Students were clamoring for one thing. It was to get back on campus, not to sit in a classroom. In fact, the number of students who continue to take at least one online course is overwhelming. The number of students who have all online courses and still sit on a college campus is much higher than most people believe. And so you look around the country and you say, oh, students were clamoring to get back to campus, but it wasn't to sit in a lecture hall. It was to have a student experience, to have a formative shared experience with other people at a certain point in their life that is going to inform what they believe about who they are and how they want to navigate the world. I still think that that has a high value proposition, the lived student experience. And institutions that are doing a really good job of defining what that means at their institution, recruiting the kinds of students that are going to fit into that paradigm and then be successful as a result of that, and be sort of indebted to that institution as a result of that, are the ones that are going to be really, really successful. The ones who don't do that, I think, are going to continue to struggle along the way. So I think about it across both those planes.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you. I think it's the value proposition.
Right.
It's the value
That's
proposition.
it.
I mean, people go to grad school for that exact same proposition, right? Community. And I'm thinking about this landscape. I think community is going to be extremely important, and a shift towards, as Richard Reeves would call it, heal careers, right? Which is like healthcare, education, and administrative roles. And that's becoming increasingly important. We've been focused on STEM for so
Hmm.
long,
Hmm.
arts as well, and heal. We've been focused on STEM for so long and pushing for STEM that, people have lost critical thinking skills. And I mean, you just said that, right? Like, the focus on identifying sources. I mean, that's basic stuff that we all
Yep.
used to do.
I've got 3 degrees, and most people don't know. I've got an MBA, I've got a doctoral degree in educational technology, but most people don't know that my undergraduate degree is in fine arts. I was a painting major at Kent State University, a medium-sized liberal arts institution, and did a ton of philosophy classes. I was a studio major. That was by miles my hardest degree, and probably the one that was most formative for me relative to the experience side and understanding, like, what do I think, what do I care about, as who do I want to be as a person in this world. And I've always been grateful for those experiences and how to apply them in my MBA work or in my doctoral work or now in my career. And so I get that. And I believe in exactly what you're saying, is like, we can't lose the humanity of this thing. We can't lose the experience. We can't lose the critical thinking and all the other pieces and parts that come along.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And as things shift, it's like we're almost building upon, it's like building blocks, right? And one of the things, again, that I feel that, especially in under-resourced and underestimated communities, people are fighting problems of yesterday,
Yeah,
preparing for tomorrow.
yeah, yeah. That's a
Fighting problems of yesterday, preparing for tomorrow.
In higher ed systems that are built for outcomes that don't apply anymore. Like, it's all mismatched. You're absolutely right.
We have to get ready for coding, right? Like everyone needs to be coding right now. Well, the new thing is low code models that are
That's
created
right.
using AI. So
Right.
that is, if
You don't
that's
need
your
to know how to
focus, that
think
was like
about
a,
coding, but not to
yeah,
code. You don't need to know how to code. Right.
that was like a thing that you prepare for 5 to 10 years ago.
That's exactly right.
So to your point earlier, universities or parents or anyone that is supporting students, how do we get ahead of this thing? What does
Yeah.
2030 look
Yeah.
like with this technology? What are the conversations that you're having with higher ed universities to, revolutionize or rethink, these
Mm.
current advancements and how they prepare for the problems of tomorrow?
Yeah, I think one of the most straightforward questions that I tend to ask people is who is the specific student that you want to serve? What is the difference that you aspire to make in the world and for whom? It's the for whom part that is super important. Institutions often struggle in the way that they're siloed. So, their enrollment target as an example. We're going to enroll X number of people and it's a target, it's a number. And, yeah, we're going to have some mix of these types of students, these types of students, but that's completely disconnected from the infrastructure of who are we built to retain? What does it mean to be successful here? And are we recruiting people that can be retained here? Or should we be trying to retain the people that we recruit? And is it possible that as we continue to develop as an institution, the kinds of people that want to be here are different? These are the kinds of pretty high level philosophical questions that I ask institutions to ask themselves. Who do you aspire to be? What difference do you want to make in the world and for whom? And then we start to move toward alignment of those things. And that I know that sounds really high level and maybe woo woo or whatever, but most people don't ask themselves that. Most people come to work and they go through their 8 hours and they do their thing, and every once in a while they might write a strategic plan with some goals, but they never look at the whole thing with fresh eyes and say, what is it we're trying to achieve in a big, big, big picture? And so I think it's different for every institution. I think differentiation is going to be the name of the game moving forward. If you rewind 20 years, every institution was targeting the same person. Everybody wanted to target the middle. Everybody had a college of education, a college of nursing, and a college of engineering. Everybody was doing very, very similar things. And the message was come here because everyone belongs here, and everybody was targeting all the people. Now I believe we are going to start to see institutions move towards differentiate. We're already seeing it move towards differentiation, where they say, here is the difference we're aspiring to make in the world. Here's who we are aspiring to make it for, and here's how we're going to do that. And if you are that person, this is where you belong, right? That's a different pitch than we're all the things to all the people.
I love that. So they're having a target audience with
Hmm.
some teeth. I think the higher in universities do that pretty well. Most people are just not happy with how they do it,
Sure.
right?
Right.
Whether
Right.
you're, top 30 school or Ivy League, most of their students are going to come from, the vast majority are going to come from backgrounds where, the household is making $100,000 or more. Some would say, some Ivy League schools, most of them are going to be of the top 10% or
Yep.
1%.
Yep.
And they have a profile, whether they're athletes or just those different differentiating factors. They know their target audience. It's really for everyone else to figure out who their target audience is,
Yes.
right?
Well, and like Harvard just dropped their or increased their threshold for free tuition. And I think it's 150K annually. It might be 100. I'm not sure what the number is off the top of my head. But
It's 200
oh,
200,000 or less and you would get free everything,
free
and
everything.
then it's below 100,000. No, below 100,000 to 200,000 you would get everything for free. And if you're, I'll keep messing this up. No, you would get tuition and fees free. If you're below 100,000, everything
So
is covered.
that's a game changer, right? In
Yeah.
terms of exactly what you talked about, which is like, who are the people? It feels like that's somebody saying, if you're asking us who the people are, it's less about socioeconomic status. We want to take that barrier down, and it's more about how they approach the world and what they want to achieve in this world relative to the way that they think. And so that's an interesting approach, and I think it's a bit of a differentiator, right? And so what are the other places that are doing things in differentiation? You might remember back when I was big on what Michael Sorrell was doing at Paul Quinn University in
Mm-hmm.
Texas, because he was so narrowly focused on like, we are going to prepare people for high achieving careers. That is our only thing in this world. And if I've got to close the football field and make it into an agricultural center to do that, I'll do it. And I thought, wow, what an unabashed move towards something you believe in. That I think is true differentiation in this world. You got to have the right conditions to be able to do that. You have the right support from your board and others. But I do think we're going to see more folks starting to move toward that differentiation piece.
Yeah. I mean, I think to your point, that's a, small university in Texas, I
Yep.
believe.
Yep.
That is the type of change that I think is revolutionary for, a smaller university. I would argue for a university like Harvard, while that barrier to entry has been lowered, I'm not sure how many students that are making less than $100,000 would turn down Harvard because they can't afford
Sure. Right. And yeah,
it.
right, right. And what does, yeah. So is there, that'll be interesting, right? And I love that you asked that question. Like what is that going to mean? Let's look at the lag indicators. What does that mean for the dynamic of the humans that end up attending that institution? Does it go unchanged and they just come out the other end with less debt, which is a good outcome,
Mhm.
but it didn't change anything relative to who comes in and who goes out. It just changed the amount of debt that they might have on the other end. Or does it change something? Does it lower a barrier and you get people in your pool that never would have been there otherwise because they never saw it as attainable? I don't know the answer.
Yeah. I mean, we're only that I think, between now and, the next 5 years, we'll see the difference.
Right.
I do agree that nonetheless is a great opportunity, especially for universities that have huge endowments. But I know for myself, and there are so many different people that if you took on $100,000 or $150,000 of debt from Harvard, you're probably going to do it, right?
Sure.
Because it's
Yeah.
Harvard.
Yeah. Well, yeah, you're looking at the ROI, the value proposition of the degree, and it outweighs it in a lot of people's minds, at least the ones that are applying to that institution. Absolutely.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So, I mean, I want to end here with this
Hmm.
last question. Again, going back to your journey when you
Yeah.
first entered into higher education and now, you know, how has your vision changed? What is the impact that you want to leave now compared to, let's say, the first, 5 to 10 years of your career?
Well, I'll say a couple things about that. One is I am very much a higher ed problem myself in that the pandemic has only accelerated a lot of the things that I already believed. They just the pandemic actually just moved it along faster. So I have always, if you would have asked me when I was 20 years old, what do I want to do in my life? I would have told you I want to do work that matters with people that I like. You asked me today, and the answer is the exact same thing. I want to do work that matters with people that I like. That's all been accelerated. The pandemic pushed me to say I want to do more work that matters on a broader scale with more people that I like. And that's what I get to do today is really think big. I'm not thinking one campus at a time. I'm thinking broadly across the industry all the time. And that's exciting and that's fun. The other thing I'll say about that is, I read a book a handful of years ago called The Two Mountains, which essentially cuts your life into two parts. And the first mountain is about your personal journey. It's about the things that you rack up as you climb that first mountain, your degrees, your relationships, your status, your titles, all those things. And then the second mountain is about everybody else. It's about how do you put those things into and use those opportunities to give back and to benefit the rest of the world. And I know right around that pandemic time is when I got to move to that second mountain. And that's really what's changed for me is that I got to move from a place where I was really focused on my career and how I could be an influence to being in a place where I can focus on everybody else. And that's a wonderful place to be. So my mission, my core vision, where I see higher ed going, it really hasn't changed that much. My ability to influence that with humility and expertise has changed quite a bit.
Wow. Wow. Thank you so much for joining. And as always, we do hope that this conversation sparked a new idea within you. Thank you.